Hi, this is Jim McRitchie. I'm hoping to run for the CalPERS board if I can get enough support from retirees in the CalPERS system and also from their organizations through endorsements. I started state service under Governor Reagan, and I worked on issues for about the next 10 years that are very important to CalPERS retirees, namely healthcare. During the next 10 years, I saved the state millions of dollars in administrative costs, in fraud and abuse, and in program development through first by diagramming decisions and flow diagrams and relatively primitive tools. Later on, with the aid of computer programs, I was able to find pharmacies and others that were defrauding the system out of millions of dollars. Um, Another thing that I did during that time period, I worked for Ken Corey towards the end of that, and he was on the CalPERS board at that point, and was looking for ways to save for CalPERS to save money. I wrote a study for him that led basically to self-funding, to the state self-funding some insurance, and that turned out to be PERS Care and PERS Choice, which I think is now gold and platinum, something like that. Uh, then at the same time, I worked on a thesis on a MPA at Cal State Sacramento, and my thesis was on worker self-management. And the idea was that first line workers would elect their direct supervisor among a pool selected by state. So that was a confusing topic for many professors out at Sac State. But when a visiting professor came from the UK, he was able to review my paper and he knew the academic literature. And then I was able to graduate. I won, for that paper, I won a Western States Governor's Award. And then that led to a grant and fellowship with the National Institute for Mental Health to study what organizational systems are best for the employee, the employer, and society at large. So I worked with ASME in Boston, and I also then worked with folks out at RathPac when the UFCW bought out the plant in Iowa. Now I came back to California and I ran the Cooperative Development Program. And this program helped ag co-ops, worker co-ops, consumer co-ops, mostly consumer co-ops. And I spent some time working with them to try to make them more efficient. But most of my time I spent lobbying to save the program because there was corporations and others that didn't want this program. They didn't want to compete with cooperatives. So I was able to save the program through a lot of grassroots lobbying. But then the governor's office redlined the budget of that program. So I found myself almost unemployed. I was able to land another job pretty quickly, which I'll tell you about. But at about the same time, I started work on some legislation to deal with toxic chemicals because I had friends who were dying from exposure to toxic chemicals. I myself had been exposed to toxic chemicals back in high school when I was working to put myself through college. I worked at poison factories and chemical factories in New Jersey and got kind of an autoimmune deficiency. So I wrote legislation that was and had bipartisan support for that legislation. It went through the legislature. But when it got to the governor's office, the California Manufacturers Association asked the governor to veto the bill, and that's what he did. But I then landed a job with the Department of Toxic Substances Control, and within about a year, I was heading their Office of Legislation and Regulations. So for the next many years, I worked on hundreds of bills with the governor's office, industry, environmentalists, and others. But I found that I was unable to regulate toxic substances. I was only really able to regulate hazardous wastes, not the products, not the what goes into the product, because that was off bounds. And here in the States, We don't have the precautionary principle that they have in the European Union, which requires companies to prove first that the products aren't toxic before they put them on the market. I also lost favor with the director. I was the ethics officer, and I gave advice which the director did not like about what I thought was legal and illegal based on my interpretation of a big manual put out by the Attorney General's office on conflicts of interests and other illegalities. So I thought I could gain more influence over companies as a shareholder rather than by regulating them. So I retired and became a shareholder activist. I filed hundreds of shareholder proposals over the next many years, and I'll give you an example of one type of proposal. So people are familiar with Roundup, I'm sure, and what many farmers are doing now is they are spraying their crops, especially grain crops, before they harvest them, right before harvest, because Roundup acts as a desiccant in dehydrating the grain so that you don't have to use a lot of fans and other mechanical means to dehydrate the grain. So it's very convenient that way. But Roundup is a carcinogen, and it goes into cereal, which is then fed to children. So we began to file a proposal. We worked with, I think the one company was Kellogg, and the group I was working with, As You Sow, was able to get them to agree to not use this product, or to cease using this practice by 2025. So at that point, we won't have Roundup in those specific cereals anyway. So I also worked on rulemaking petitions and testified on issues at the SEC. One of the more recent things I fought to get was to have the rulemaking that would force funds to disclose in a machine-readable format how they vote their proxies on these issues, disclosing political contributions and lobbying and meeting Paris Accord agreements on climate change, and getting more women on their board, and getting rid of agreements that employees have to sign to go through arbitration instead of going to court if they're sexually harassed, those kinds of things. So, but now you'll be able to, pretty soon, if this rule goes through, funds will compete not based just on how much they have earned for folks and what their costs are, but they'll also compete based on how they vote. And do those votes align with how we would vote if we had that opportunity? So I also helped to overturn what amounted to an underground rule at the SEC. I've worked with shareholder organizations like the Council for Institutional Investors, which CalPERS helped to found way back when. And I've also worked with I am a member of the Interfaith Center for Corporate Responsibility, which helped to end apartheid in South Africa. I've also represented myself in federal court. One way companies can get your proposal off the proxy is to bargain with you, negotiate, and mutual withdrawal. Another way is to ask the SEC for a no action letter. So basically they write a legal brief to the SEC, you write a legal brief to defend your proposal, and then the SEC renders a decision, and if it's favorable to the company, it's called a no action letter, because they will take no action against the company if they leave the proposal off the proxy. Well, a third way companies can get an item off the proxy is to take the proponent to court. And of course, that's very expensive. That can cost hundreds of thousands of dollars for the company, and also hundreds of thousands of dollars for the shareholder proponent to defend themselves in court. I was taken to court several times. I lost twice. One, I lost in appeals court, a federal appeals court, which is right below the Supreme Court. Now, I didn't hire an attorney. I just represented myself in court, and I did lose those cases, but I did not lose court costs because attorneys basically have threatened me that I might lose my house because of their expensive fees, and if the court awarded costs, then it would cost me hundreds of thousands of dollars. But I did not, the courts did not award them costs. And then I prevailed in Boston, New York, and Colorado. So, and I haven't been sued since, and I don't expect to be sued again. I'm currently, though, suing the SEC to overturn Trump-era rules. Remember I said towards the beginning that with $2,000 you could file a proposal at a company. Well, now, after Trump's SEC, that's $25,000 instead of $2,000. And when they did that rulemaking, they weighed the costs to companies, but they did not weigh the benefits to society or to the companies or to anybody else. So at least in my mind, they did not. So we're suing the SEC to overturn that rule, and hopefully we'll have a decision around May. I also hold weekly Zoom discussions with thought leaders. So, for example, I held a Zoom conference with a forum with the head of investments at the AFL-CIO, Brandon Reese. And you can look on and find that interview and discussion at Corp Engage. That's CORPENGAGE.net. So we, and the next one on my agenda is the former Chief Justice of the Delaware Supreme Court. I'll be interviewing him, so if you want to join in, come to the forum and you can ask questions. If you don't get a chance to go live to the forum, we upload those to YouTube, and then we then upload them as podcasts. So I've also been involved in CalPERS for several decades. So I testified, so people are familiar, I'm sure, with Adam Schiff, who helped run the impeachment hearings in Congress. Well, before Adam Schiff was a congressional representative, he was a state senator here in California, and I testified before his committee on what I thought was graft and corruption and other problems at CalPERS. And I wouldn't say it's directly as a result of my testimony or anything that Adam Schiff did during those hearings, but not too long after there was prosecutions of the CEO of CalPERS and several board members. I also helped overturn underground rules at CalPERS. One regarding gifts, what is a gift and how is it defined and all that. Another, they passed a rule that barred candidates from discussing issues in their candidate statements. They could only discuss what their qualifications are. I went to the Sacramento Bee. They wrote an editorial, and we got that rulemaking scuttled. Another thing that I did was made sure that in the future and currently, candidates at CalPERS are elected by a majority vote. At one point, we had candidates elected, I think, with like a 16% vote, something like that. They were voted on a plurality vote basis. Whoever, there could be a number of candidates running, and whoever got the most won. And now, if there is not a majority, then there has to be a runoff. Another, last thing I'll mention on CalPERS in this regard is I started CalPERS candidate forums. You may be familiar with. I held the first CalPERS candidate forum, and I hired a hall out in East Sacramento, paid for that myself, invited the candidates. The one candidate who was expected to win did not show up to that candidate forum, which was covered by the news, and that candidate lost. The following year, instead of hiring a hall, I was able to obtain the auditorium at CalSTRS. And CalSTRS, we used their auditorium. And the following year, CalPERS finally felt it was okay to go forward and hold it in their auditorium. And we got the League of Women Voters to basically conduct the forums, and that's how it's been held ever since. So I've been a long-term engaged member of the Retired Public Employees Association, the California State Retirees Association, California State Retirees. And I think I have the qualifications to be an excellent board member with your help. I will count on input from organizations and from individuals in the system, but I will spend basically full time as you to represent you on the CalPERS board. If you'd like to find out more about me, you can Google me. Just type in James McRitchie in quotes. You'll get about 40,000 hits. You can look up, find out where I live, what my phone number is, where I went to high school, all kinds of things about me. And also lots of podcasts that I've done over the years, and people that have interviewed me and I've interviewed them, and classes that I've taught, etc. So, and if you're interested, please get in touch with me. Thank you very much.